Hey all, it's my last video before Christmas and New Year, so I just wanted to open with a Merry Christmas to everyone celebrating and to wish everyone a really good New Year. And in the spirit of the season, I have come to give you all something very special in this video. Some Christmas beef. Okay, I'm just kidding. This isn't a beef video, and long-time viewers know that I don't like to make videos about people. But this particular person has provided a specific example of something I talk about in another video, and like the raging bull that I am, I can't resist a red rag being waved in my face, and so here we are. So this is just a reminder that you should leave the subject of this video alone, though I am going to link to their video below because this kind of response video means that I have to take clips of their work, and while I'll try to allow the clips to have as much context as possible, I can't just put all 15 minutes of Owen Jones's video in the middle of my one because that's unfair on everyone involved, I would guess. So if you do want to watch this whole video, you ought to be on your best behavior, okay? I don't want to have to apologize for you all acting like oafs in someone's comment. That being said, while Owen says in his video that he's going to be succinct, I'm not, because we need to understand some things before we actually get into the video and establish some terms of criticism here, because there will be some of you who will wonder why I'm not talking about certain things. And part of it's because this is a YouTube video and I have to edit it. Seriously, I am not making a 90-minute breakdown on Owen Jones as a person and then editing it. It's just not happening. The second part is we have to actually establish why I felt the need to break my habit and respond directly to something someone else made, and also what role Owen Jones occupies in our media ecosystem, what political tendency he belongs to, and how that impacts why he's wrong, not just from a generalized perspective, but from any sound understanding of his own self-professed political interests. This video is going to have timestamps for each bit, so if you're someone who knows about things like the Labour left, or Labourism, or why I do this voice to impersonate Keir Starmer, then you're probably good to skip to the next section after the context section. So let's dig into our beef, not beef. God, alright, need to stop doing that. Let's just get on with it. Alright everyone, let's get comfortable, relax a bit, have a little drink. It's really good. It's cloudy lemonade. It's really, really good. It's time for some context and an explanation from me. Why am I doing a response video when I hate that sort of thing? I'm not even particularly sure I'd be very good at it, and I prefer to talk generally about things. Well, it's because I've spoken generally about some of the types of arguments that Owen deploys in his video in another video I've done, which was the video on lesser evils and lesser evilism more generally, which is the one where I spray-dyed my hair white and dressed as Palpatine. So I thought this would be a good opportunity for us to be a little more specific about those things and actually look at those arguments as presented by someone I think isn't acting maliciously. I also want to take this time to make the point that I don't think this video that Owen made is one with career ambitions in mind. I believe this is a sincere expression of opinion, mostly, and that's how we're going to treat it. Like it was a thoughtful, serious attempt to set out why Owen is going to vote Labour, even if, as he puts it in the video title, they hate him. That also goes for his commonly expressed view that Keir Starmer ran the most dishonest leadership campaign to become leader of the Labour Party, which I agree with, incidentally. Why is Owen Jones having to make a video about why he's planning to vote Labour in this case? Surely it's open and shut, right? Labour is the largest left-of-centre party, which means they presumably have a left-of-centre policy platform that distinguishes them from the Conservative Party, and that's that. Well, allow me to introduce you to the most knighted ham in the land, Keir Starmer. Now, Keir Starmer is, as my friend Jack from Real Politic Podcast puts it, leading a right-wing political project and has surrounded himself with people who think Britain should have joined the Vietnam War on the side of the Americans. I'm not kidding. That's genuinely true, by the way. So this means that the Labour Party is engaged in what I can only consider the most disgusting embrace of right-wing policy that we've seen in a while, quite literally tracking the Tory party's positions. So if you're like me, a left-winger, and just to be open about it, I was once a member of the Labour Party, you have very little reason to look at Labour and be excited about them. Now, sometimes being excited isn't what you need. I could certainly conceive of a fundamentally boring person who has a substantive policy platform that I believe would try to actually go and implement those policies. I can imagine such a person. So there are a lot of people who just aren't bothered by Labour, or are actively opposing them for a lot of different reasons. And one of the things that Owen points out in the video, that I agree with, is that a lot of people who seem to think anything to the left of Tony Blair is electoral asbestos seem to be very bothered by criticism from their left, and act as if the criticism itself will ruin Keir Starmer's chance at government. And if their hypothesis is that those people are electoral asbestos, then that should probably make you happy. Owen Jones happens to hold a certain position. He's certainly the most widely followed, firmly left-of-centre commentator in the UK. If I picked a random person off the street and asked them to name a socialist journalist without getting into how socialist or not particular people are, they'd probably name Owen Jones. They'd also try not to get hair on their face. Good. So when he explains that he's voting Labour, as he always has done when he's been able to vote, it rubs a lot of people the wrong way. But this is where I'm a bit confused by some of the criticism of Owen, because Owen belongs to a political grouping called the Labour Left, and the clever among you may have been able to figure out that that group are the left-wing faction within the Labour Party. This faction has a long and storied tradition of not really holding significant power within the party. That doesn't mean it's not important or at times influential, but since World War II, they've controlled the party, including its bureaucratic machine, for a grand total of around 18 months. They've also had some iconic figures, Nye Bevan, Tony Benn, Jeremy Corbyn, so, you know, kind of an interesting bunch, but not really the main subject of the video. The thing that's important to remember about this faction, though, is that they're legitimately different from, say, your typical communism poster on Twitter.com or me, in that they adhere to an idea commonly known as Labourism, or as shitposters will call it, Labour brain. To summarise what Labourism is, it's a set of beliefs among the left in the UK, but particularly the Labour left, that the only political vehicle for significant progressive or left-wing change is the Labour Party. And that presents some interesting and obvious problems and is quite a limiting way to think, but it is nonetheless what we're dealing with here mostly. So when we're looking at Owen Jones' reasons for why he's going to vote Labour, we need to understand that he's entirely sincere about voting for Labour, while also believing Keir Starmer is a known liar who admits that he's willing to lie. You and I might think that's a difficult divide to bridge, but apparently my straw also thinks so. But I have a hypothesis as to how he's going to be able to do that, which I'll share a little later. It's also important to remember that this video isn't just targeted at people like me who see Owen say he's planning to go vote Labour and go, why the fuck are you doing that? It's also a message to what he calls the most boring cult in the world, and again, I happen to agree with that. There's actually some bits of the video that aren't entirely disagreeable, which does make the rest of it kind of a shame, to be honest. This is also a video directed at Keir Starmer supporters, who claim Owen Jones wants Labour to fail. He doesn't. He might be able to acknowledge the flaws, which is me being polite about Labour, by the way, but he'll still cheer when they win by-elections or are polling 20 points ahead. So there we have it, an extremely right-wing Labour Party led by a decaying ham man who's even more right-wing, and the left-of-centre journalist whose political tendency is one which often prioritises the Labour in Labour left, far too often. And I would know, you know, as I mentioned earlier, I was a member of Labour for around 4.5 years, so I too have been under this particular spell at times, but we all grow up eventually. Okay, that was mean. Let's get into the specifics of the video. What exactly does Owen Jones think he's doing in this video? Luckily for us, he's quite upfront about it. He's setting out the reasons why he's voting Labour, and he's perfectly entitled to make a video like that and put it out for general consumption and criticism. There is a little problem though, and like a lot of problems, it became clear on Twitter.com. Some people challenged him something along the lines of, why are you telling people or trying to persuade people to vote Labour? And Owen responded by claiming he's not doing that and reverting back to, these are my reasons to vote Labour. And I'd like to believe that, but even if it's his intent, it's not really the outcome of what he's doing. Owen Jones has a significant platform. Much more significant than me, certainly. At the time of recording, he has 1 million followers on Twitter and over 200,000 on YouTube and an opinion column in The Guardian. The thing about all that is, just expressing your opinion might be the intent, but the outcome is that some people will be influenced by what you say. Even I, with my teeny tiny platform, couldn't credibly come out and say, I'm not telling you what to do, I'm just expressing my opinion, because people would rightly turn around and ask, well, why are you doing it then? That doesn't mean I think Owen is lying about his intent, to be clear, but I do think someone with a platform of that scale can't say, these are my reasons and mine alone for why I'm doing something, published to my large platforms with no intent to change anyone's mind, without at least causing people to raise their eyebrows a little bit. What does that mean for how we have to treat this video? Well, for one, I think it means that we should treat it as an attempt to persuade, not necessarily someone like me, who's not going to be persuaded, but at least some portion of Owen Jones' audience to hold their nose and put up with Keir Starmer. That means I think it's fair game for someone to present counter-arguments and examples without making it about the person, because I don't care about the personal elements of this, so I'm going to try to avoid being personal here. And if you catch me being personal from this point onwards, you need to tell me that I fucked up, basically. Though I think YouTube won't let you have that in the comments. So you've got to find a way to phrase it, but you've got to tell me. Owen begins with an explanation of what's prompted him to make this video, and it unsurprisingly begins with the fact that he's often under attack from the most tedious cult in the world, which is Keir Starmer supporters, who are insisting that his criticisms of Labour and Keir Starmer is tantamount to being a Tory enabler. Which it's not, so credit where it's due to Owen, I guess. He also points out that the vast majority of his content is directed at the Tories, which is, again, fair enough. And he also explains the flawed logic of his centrist detractors in this clip, which again I find agreeable enough because I said it earlier, basically.
Their logic makes no sense, because if they think that Starmer's strategy of waging war on the left and marginalising the left is correct, then the more lefties like me complain about it, the better. I mean, it doesn't make it, it's this kind of Schrodinger's left. The left is so toxic and marginal and irrelevant that it should be crushed, and it needs to be crushed, but also so powerful that if we tweet criticising Keir Starmer, then we can decide entire general elections. Doesn't make any sense. Either the strategy's right, marginalise the left, crush the left, in which case me complaining about it helps that strategy, or it's wrong, in which case me complaining about it is the least of Labour's troubles.
So he's right here. The logic of the critics that he's primarily aiming this video at is flawed. It's kind of a shame that this video wasn't just that 40-second clip, because then this video wouldn't exist, but that's life, I guess. He then addresses another line of critique, to which I'm more aligned, which is, why is he voting Labour, a party that expresses hatred for his particular political tendency, and by his own admission, him personally. In fact, let's listen to Owen as he describes this line of critique and sets out some of the issues with Keir Starmer's Labour and Keir Starmer himself.
But the other line of critique is, why are you voting for a party whose leadership frankly hates everything you stand for? And actually, in my case, a lot of them actually just personally hate me. I can tell you that as a fact. The Labour leadership is stitching up selections to stop any lefty getting selected. We're doing a whole show, the next show's about that, with the former Channel 4 journalist Michael Crick and also John McDonnell, the Labour MP, who's written to Keir Starmer about it. Keir Starmer's leadership campaign was the most deceitful leadership campaign in history. I didn't say election campaign. I know the Tories do deceitful election campaigns. Talking about the leadership campaign for a major political party, obviously made a whole raft of promises, from nationalisation to party unity and having a broad church and letting members select their own candidates, which are obviously complete lies. Liberals ignore that, or self-described liberals. They know it was deceitful. They know, obviously, the whole leadership campaign was a bunch of lies.
And everything he's described here is true, and this is where the problems begin to appear, because Owen hasn't exaggerated. In fact, I think he's understated or omitted some of the problems, but it's also unreasonable to expect someone to cover literally everything, right? If it's that bad, I think he has to provide a compelling series of arguments to outweigh these downsides. The first reason Owen cites is the electoral system and the failure of breakaway parties from Labour to gain any purchase because of that system.
So firstly, there's the electoral system. We have first past the post, which I don't support. I want proportional representation. The problem with that is it makes new political parties very, very difficult to gain purchase. all breakaways from the Labour Party in its 122-year existence have failed without any exception.
The facts of this are essentially correct. He dismisses the idea that the SNP represent a success story on the grounds that they're a broad tent and a nationalist party who adopt whatever political position they need to achieve Scottish independence. A criticism I find a little unfair, but it is what it is. The SNP actually show a significant feature of the electoral system, which is that if you concentrate your vote in particular areas, you get really disproportionate results. But also, the fact that it took them generations doesn't mean that it always has to. Something about the general Labour attitude of they have nowhere to go is that the alternative isn't obvious until it is. Now, I don't think spending a lot of time on electoral projects is necessarily the best use of people's time, given that we have some ticking time bombs about to go off. But there are a couple of thoughts I'd like to offer. First is that the electoral system in itself isn't a reason to vote for Labour. We do live in a country with multiple political parties, some terrible, some evil, some kind of okay, and some that are just plain inaccessible to me, a person living in England, so my opinion can be discarded. So you don't have to give them your vote so easily. Also, you can just not vote if you find all of them distasteful. Second is that the UK has the potential to be quite volatile, and not just for the reason that we're in an economic and social crisis, but because that economic crisis undermines one of the few things that British politics is really meant to operate on. That the products of growth are directed to whichever party is in power's core electorate to keep them sweet. Now, there are degrees of this, and sometimes, especially when it's Labour to be honest, you get kind of a shitty deal if you're their core voter, but usually there's something. The problem is, where's the growth coming from with which to provide the goodies to the electorate? The core understanding of how UK politics is meant to operate is essentially fatally undermined, and that produces opportunities. And it may not take a particularly massive amount for, well, Labour's not the Tories to evolve into, hey, look at all these other parties, also famously, not the Tories, and people putting two and two together on that front. Next, Owen cites the trade union link. For those of you not in the know, the UK Labour Party was founded as what some like to call the political wing of organised labour, and trade unions that are affiliated to the party retain a degree of internal influence to this day. Historically, this link was perhaps more important because we had higher trade union density, and the Labour Party was in some ways quite a bit more open to listening to the demands of organised labour, but only really when it aligned with state aims and goals. So let's just hear Owen talk about the trade union link and its importance.
The trade union link, because Labour still has a link with the trade unions, the Labour movement, that means the unions, well, it provides them with an umbilical cord, which is a connection to millions of working class people, and it provides a means of putting pressure on the Labour leadership to do things that will benefit working class people.
I would be sympathetic to this, usually. There have been occasions where Keir Starmer has been moved, but only really when he crosses trade unions seen as closer to the Labour right, who you can imagine as the opposite of the Labour left, but much more vicious in practice. The fact is that just because trade unions are affiliated to an organisation doesn't mean that this connection exists or is significant. In fact, I'd argue that a lot of UK trade unions are quite divorced from the reality of working class people. I remember the GMB, which is a Labour-affiliated trade union, forming a partnership with Deliveroo in order to basically scab on the IWGB, who aren't Labour-affiliated and weren't so placid and weak that Deliveroo were willing to enter a union partnership with them. Whatever the fuck that is. Never mind the fact that even if Keir Starmer and Labour can be pressured, I'm sceptical of this, by the way, there's no reason to take them at their word, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. I also want to make the point that the trade union link probably isn't worth very much when Labour are supporting bringing in the army to break strikes.
So on the issue of the army being brought in the interim period, do you support them being brought in to cover emergency services?
Well, we're left with no choice, and so yes, we do support that.
Next, Owen talks about left-wing MPs and where we get them from, so I'll let Owen take it away from here.
Thirdly, the issue of left-wing MPs. You get some people going, well, why don't they all resign the whip? Because, again, under the electoral system, they probably lose their seats. You might look at, there isn't enough left-wing MPs, but the only way we have left-wing MPs essentially is through the Labour Party.
You might look at that and have the same question I do, which is, we get left-wing MPs through the Labour Party. To do what exactly, and to what effect? This argument may have held water in 1945 when the Labour leadership, well, not of the Labour left, seemed capable of being in the same room as someone like Nye Bevan. Now we have a leadership that's kicked out the only person from the Labour left to lead the party, and is actively seeking to repudiate the politics of the Labour left, which is an issue we'll kind of touch on a little bit later as well. He then makes a point I don't wholly disagree with regards to the lack of alternatives available in the electoral system. Of course, I would point to my earlier comment about the alternative not being obvious until it is, but I want us to listen to Owen here and see if we notice something about his criticisms of the alternatives.
Fourthly, no credible alternative. I'm sorry, but I'm not going to support the Green Party, who themselves... Look, I've got a lot of time for people in the Greens. My good friend Matt, our cousin, has joined the Greens. And, you know, they have socialists in it. They have people I would regard basically as liberals. I mean, the Green Party have gone a bit FPPE. You know, they're all kind of, you know, it's got this become this very anti-Brexit. It's quite a, you know, it's a party that I don't think has strong roots in working class communities. My politics is based on class politics. So obviously I believe in tackling the climate emergency and linking that to social justice. But even if I thought they had a shot at winning more MPs, which I don't, it's their brand of politics doesn't sit easily with my own.
I actually agree with these critiques of the Greens. Now, his critiques aren't identical to mine. For example, among the engaged membership of the Greens, there is a significant transphobic element to the point that they're getting selected as candidates, though the Greens did suspend the candidate that I'm thinking of, which is more than Labour are doing with their notorious transphobic element. For those not in the know, when Owen says FBPE, he's referring to a group of Twitter posters who basically had their minds melted by Brexit and made its reversal their whole reason for existing. And I agree, the Greens did privilege membership in what I consider to be an all-whites club over actual environmentalist policies. Now, I'm a person who likes to hold a grudge, so I'm not really going to blame Owen and begrudge Owen that point over the Greens. I will say that everything Owen says could and actually ought to be true with Labour. This idea that the trade union link is providing a connection to the working class and their communities is questionable, especially when you consider how white the Labour Party is and how not white the working class actually is. Next, Owen decides to talk about the gap between the Labour and the Tory party, which he concedes is too small, and the fact that there's millions of people in that gap. So let's go to him again.
Fifthly, there's the gap which exists between the Tories and the Labour Party. So in my view, it's too small. But millions of people live in that gap. Do you see what I mean? So, you know, Labour is committed to restoring various workers' rights and trade union rights. Are they going far enough? No. But there'll be more rights than under the Conservatives, and it'll be easier for unions to be able to fight back. Under Labour, they'll have more space to breathe. There'll be less cuts to benefits. Will they reverse properly the attacks on the welfare state? No. But even reversing some will mean a huge amount to people who are living in desperate circumstances. They'll build more council housing. Enough? No. But again, some council housing. They'll, you know, put more money in the National Health Service. Enough? No. But again, more money. They're committed to £28 billion a year for the transition to a green economy. Is that enough? No, but it's something to tackle the climate emergency. You see, I could go on. These aren't enough, but they are something.
The first thing you'll notice is this repetition of Labour not being enough or not doing enough, and he refers to that gap between Labour and the Tories and the number of people who live in that gap. You might be surprised to learn I don't disagree with that characterisation. I also believe that an awful lot of people live in that gap. But the thing I'm more interested in is how small that gap is and how many people live in the overlap between the parties. Politics is to an extent about making choices, and Owen has chosen to focus on those millions, at least according to his estimate, who exist in that gap. I prefer to think about the millions who live in the overlap, and for me that overlap is now far too big to countenance voting Labour. Even if you have a good left-wing MP, you shouldn't vote for them because, and this is something they don't tell you in the Lesser Evil Factory, a reluctant vote counts the same as an enthusiastic vote. If you want an example of the kinds of people who exist in that overlap, think of GRT people whose existence has basically been made illegal by the Tories and who Labour didn't really come out to defend. Think of asylum seekers with Sensible's hero Yvette Cooper basically demanding the Tories speed up deportations. Or think of Muslim people. The Shadow Health Secretary and haunted McDonald's-obsessed doll, Wes Streeting gave a talk at something called the Policy Exchange. Why do I bring this up? Because the Policy Exchange recently released a blacklist of mainly Muslim people and early career academics who gave their support to an investigation into institutional Islamophobia in the UK related to the Trojan Horse affair. Friends of mine were on that list, so excuse me if I take it a little personally on their behalf. He also brings up the £28 billion a year for a green transition, without bringing up the substance of that or whether it's enough, and it's not, and I can promise you that the substance is dogshit. There's this strain of thought that unifies Owen with a lot of the most tedious cult in the world, and it's that they believe a known liar is lying to everyone but them, or at least that's how it appears. Maybe Keir Starmer is serious about that £28 billion and is going to follow through. But we've been here before. Remember the 10 pledges? So we're left in a position where we can't and shouldn't take Labour at its word. So while yes, money to a just green transition would be nice, I just have no cause to believe that it'll happen. The rest of the video is a relatively long bit about Owen's theory of change, and the specific points that I kind of noted is that the left comes to prominence under Labour governments and is able to build itself due to the room it's afforded, and that Starmer will disappoint people, especially young people who have been politicised, which he will, to be fair, and that will galvanise extra parliamentary opposition to him because they think they can win something from Labour. I think there's a couple of problems with this hypothesis. Firstly, that the left will come to prominence due to rupture points with Labour. I've got bad news for those of us on the left, and even the Labour left. Starmer winning will be used to grind us into the dust. They will have the organs of the state under their control, and then all bets will be off. Never mind the narrative that the Labour right will spin, that'll be the least of our troubles. But do we really believe that the cured ham who abstained on spy cops, who's obsessed with hounding the left out of mainstream politics, won't abuse that power? I'm not buying it. And by voting for Labour as a person of the Labour left, and never mind the wider left, you're voting for your own irrelevance and for a political project designed explicitly to repudiate you. That's not smart politics. That's called not being serious about who your opposition are. The other issue I take is with this idea that people will be disappointed or let down into action against Labour. I think accelerationism is an interesting idea, not fully sure where I stand on it, but I think this idea is misplaced for a couple of reasons in this specific case. One is that Keir Starmer's shadow cabinet are going around basically saying, oh, well, we'd love to do these things, but we don't have the money because Liz Truss bought too many candles. Which, setting aside the illiteracy of that position, is what you're meant to say after you've won. These people can't even pretend to offer the prospect of improvement, which some might say was the point of the press and political class's meltdown from 2015 onwards, but maybe that's a topic for another day. My point here is that people are already disengaged, and when Keir Starmer wins, or if, I still think there's an if in there, a lot of people who are only really mad because the blue team are in power will switch off, and you'll never be able to get them to turn on the ham man. And you've already switched off the rest of the people with the terrible political offering of the ham man, so all I have left to ask is, who's left? I think Owen is pinning his hopes on a theory of change that may have held water historically, but doesn't under these specific circumstances and with our specific recent political history, and is basically acting as a turkey voting for Christmas. See, I told you, I was bringing some kind of Christmas spirit to this. All of that leaves me with a question. Where do we go from here? I don't believe Owen will respond to this video, but if he does, I'll be interested to see what he thinks. And I don't think I'll be changing his mind on the matter of voting for Labour because, as I said, it's essential to his political DNA. And while that's bad, I guess it's not exactly at the top of my list of crimes we need to urgently solve. So that leaves you, the viewer, and me in an interesting place. I've already mentioned my video on lesser evilism, which I would encourage you to watch for the general overview of this kind of thing. But there's a more specific video, actually, by one of the patrons of this channel about voting for the lesser evil. I'll link to it below and do the magic YouTube thing that I don't understand where a link will appear somewhere. But they made what I think is a killer argument in this case, and I'm going to quote them. We've been voting for the lesser evil pretty much since time immemorial now. And how has that gone for you? Is your life better now than it was 20 years ago? Or 10 years ago? If you're answering yes to that question, I don't really know what you're doing here or why you've got so far into the video, but if you've got that much cash, the least you could do is go to my Patreon. It's linked down below. Seriously though, these people profess to only care about winning, and the way they win is by getting your vote. You might, by the quirks of first past the post, live somewhere where your vote may not matter very much, which is all the more reason for you to just not bother voting Labour, to be honest. And if you live in a marginal seat, then you should definitely still not vote Labour, because the only language these people will understand is the language of elections, and they might win without you anyway. And we can cross that bridge if we come to it. But you shouldn't give your support unconditionally to these people. A lot of people get a little wound up by this kind of argument. I remember one person who yelled at me on Twitter saying that I prioritise punishing the opposition over getting the Tories out. And that might have been a good point, if we hadn't just had a 4.5-year exercise in punishing the opposition instead of getting the Tories out. The lesser evil argument and the idea that any Labour government is better than the Tories was supposed to be a reciprocal one. And when you don't reciprocate, well, here we are. Thanks for watching, everyone. Oh, well, there you go. That's the last video before Christmas and the New Year. So everyone, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year if you didn't catch it in the beginning. I want to go out of my way to thank a few people. So first of all, I want to thank my partner for this ridiculous jumper she knitted me like 4 years ago. It is really warm and really nice, and it has some nice shiny buttons on it, so I hope you enjoyed the jumper. I also want to thank my top tier subscribers: Drone Riff, John N, Kersley Scheider, Mercutio, and SMD. If you would like your own shout out, the Patreon is down below. Remember everyone, like and subscribe, and also I have a Discord that's now open to the public. The link will also be down below. And with that everyone, once again, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, take it easy, stay safe, and look forward to my 2023 content schedule. It is really good. See you everyone.